All right. And we're live streaming on YouTube now too. Cool.
Adriana, I don't know. It says on my end I can pause or stop the recording on the Zoom.
Can you?
Is it because I'm the host? Question mark.
You're like the sub host.
Oh, I am. I didn't know that. I was just
Mhm.
kind of intrigued about that.
Yeah. You're like the cool secondary host. Yeah, these are like the Autodesk mystery backgrounds. They're kind of interesting. Yeah. All right. I think we're just going to start recording and get going then. Again, if you have questions or if I'm going through to something too fast, then just let me know and we'll pause for a little bit and reset. And then Renee, before I start, I just sent you on Discord the YouTube link if you want to throw that into the world. Cool. All right. And we should be recording, hopefully. Are we? Cool. I'm going to assume we're recording. And then if we're not, Renee and I will just do this again between the two of us and it'll be great because that's the modern age that we live in. Okay, so first of all, my name is Adriana Watson and this is Renee. We already went over this, but we're going to do it again, just, for the recording. We are both Fusion 360 ambassadors here at Purdue. And this is sort of the first live demo in our live demo series. Today we're talking about parametric modeling, which is a super important part of CAD modeling. That's basically what lets us change parameters later if we're not so sure about the exact dimensions, but we know the relationship between those dimensions. And the example that we're using for that is going to be an ice cream maker, which was originally invented by a woman. Although there's a weird amount of controversy around it, the original design is functionally just, or really was functionally just two cylinders inside of each other with a paddle. And then the paddle basically has holes in it. It mixes up all of the cream and all of that. And suddenly, eventually, after a long period of time, you have hand-churned ice cream. If you're interested, we will, Renee can go ahead and post some of the references and links in the chat for that. So we're gonna hop into Fusion and I'm going to show you sort of the original design that we have. And I'm gonna invert the colors so you can actually see things. Okay, so this is what we sort of came up with as far as like an actual design. So a couple little fun things about this design. It's more loosely based off of the original design. It's the same concept, it's the same function, but it's significantly smaller. So I'll provide the model at the end of this. I'll provide the link to it, but it is 3D printable. At least it fits on my bed. I have an Ender 3 and I went in and measured my bed. Right now it's a 6-inch diameter and the overall height is about 8 inches with handle and all of that. So a big print, but also, you can't just have like 2 scoops of ice cream. That would be sad. So this is the model. I'm going to first run you through how I created the model and some of my logic within that. And that'll bring up some of the thoughts that we have when we're sort of working with Fusion, because it is slightly different from a lot of other modeling software that you might be familiar with, even though it's from Autodesk, which is a pretty well-known name. So start from zero, obviously. The big thing with Fusion, if you're unfamiliar, is unlike something like Inventor or CATIA or SolidWorks or any of those, where you have part files that go into a larger assembly file, Fusion likes to work all in one singular file. While you can make individual part files and then pull them into one larger file, those different files aren't differentiated from each other. They're the same kind of file. So what we really want to do instead of that is create components, and components are basically our parts. And so you can think of every Fusion file as functionally an assembly file in and of itself. And like part files, you can pull components from one assembly file, if you will, into another assembly pretty easily. You can link them because it's a cloud-based software, and you can do all kinds of fun stuff with that. So we're starting from 0. And the first thing that we're going to do is just create our component for the barrel. You can see that pop up right here in my tree. I like just name things based off of shape. It's important to name things more so off of something that you'll remember what it is, so that when you have to go back and edit it, you actually know things. I know a lot of people that like to do funny names for things and it never really works out. So we created our component. Our component is going to pop up right at this origin. This is sort of my default origin plane, especially because we're having it stand up. And the next thing we're going to do is create a sketch. As you can see, the sketch is basically just a circle, but this is a pretty important circle. Because the dimension of the circle is going to be our sort of most important parameter. It's the outer diameter of our outside cylinder. I'll show you the parameter tree at the very end. All you need to know for now is basically when I did the sketch here, I named the parameter and it was automatically put into my favorite parameters. So then I can go back and I can use that name. And this dimension is what pretty much almost all of my dimensions are based off of. So by changing this one dimension or changing one of the relationships with this dimension, I can change everything in the drawing all at once with effectively one change in dimension, which is pretty neat. So we made the sketch. Oh, I did it again. We made the sketch, and that's going to be extruded into a cylinder. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the shell tool. Could I create a sketch on this top plane, make a smaller cylinder, and extrude it downwards? Yes. I would say that the shell tool is very handy for more complicated things, but it's good to get into the habit of doing that. And essentially all the shell tool does is it says, hey, I want you to take this cylinder starting at this face, and I want you to make all of the wall thicknesses this size. And the other thing that allows me to do is set a wall thickness parameter, and that's also a parameter that I use frequently throughout this to calculate things that need a little bit of tolerancing between them. And that's pretty fun. I really like using the shell tool. It's very helpful for more complex geometry, like say if you wanted to make a really wacky ice mold. A cool way to do that would be to do all of the outside geometry and then just shell it out, and you'd be good to go instead of trying to recreate the geometry on the inside, which would be difficult and boring and not very fun. So I'm going to create another component that's going to be our inner barrel. And that's what's holding our cream and sugar and future ice cream components, if you will. Created a sketch. This is just another cylinder. However, the diameter of this cylinder is not only its own parametric dimension, it's one that is based off of this outside diameter. So essentially, if this outside diameter changes, or if the space between these two changes, everything relating to this inner cylinder, which we'll see in a second, will also change. So I'm also just going to go through the same process and shell this guy out. And then you'll see I'm creating another sketch. What I'm actually doing is creating a sketch inside here. Yeah, I'm creating another sketch inside here, and you can see in the highlighting here. And these are just notches. So in this inner cylinder, it's just a plate at the bottom whose outer diameter is the inner diameter of our big cylinder. And then on the big cylinder, it's 2 raised notches. And this is just because since it's a hand crank ice cream churner, we don't want the inner cylinder rotating while we're trying to churn it. It's not a lot of fun. So we're just going to create some notches just to keep it in place so it doesn't move around all the time. I did it. No. Okay. And then we're going to scroll through. So we create those notches. That's just creating a sketch and extruding all of those things. And then I'm going to move it to the side. I could also hide these and work that way, but I prefer to sort of move things around and be able to see all of my components, just because I'm a very visual person. So the next thing that we're gonna do is create those extruded notches up there. And these two are relational to each other, so they have a relationship. So if I change one, again, the theme of the day is if I change one, everything will change. So we're gonna go in and we're gonna make those notches, and then we're making our next component with it, which is the lid. All the lid is an extruded cylinder with some fillets and other things on it. This is just a cutout, so it fits nicely inside that inner barrel. And then I'm just gonna fill at the top so that it looks nice. The next 3 steps you can see here are just me making planes. There's 1,000,001 ways to CAD things. I personally like to CAD things off of a central plane and then mirror them symmetrically. It helps you do a lot of internal features and do things a little bit more effectively. So what I did to create the handle on top of this guy is essentially I made a tangent plane. I offset the tangent plane so that it was in the middle. And then I created my sketch for the handle on that tangent plane. And then I extruded that sketch symmetrically both ways. That's just my preference. I think it's a little bit more consistent. And the other thing is that it's not reliant on any of the outside geometry, just in case that changes. It's just wherever that central plane is. So then the next thing that we're gonna do is clean it up by adding a couple extra fillets, because that's always a good practice, especially if you're just 3D printing something. Can get a little bit iffy if you're milling something. And then I'm going to create a hole going all the way through this. And that hole is going to host our next component, which is the paddle, which is a pretty fun part. That's what's actually churning our ice cream. So we're going to create a sketch for the cylinder that goes through the entire thing. We're going to extrude that sketch downwards, which you can see here. And then I'm going to create another sketch on the top. That sketch is going to be used to create a notch for the handle to go into. And I'm going to extrude that as well. And then I'm going to pull this guy off to the side, just so that I can see it a little bit better. Again, I could hide these things and do everything in place, but that's just not my personal preference. The next thing that we need to make is all of the cool curved paddle geometry. That can be a little bit tricky. It's definitely the trickiest part of this, and I will show you how I personally did it. So the first thing you can see is there's a spline here. A spline is something I like to use as much as possible. It's typically like a freeform line, if you will. It's made up of little tiny lines and also little tiny arcs. And you can get really nice organic geometry out of it. It's especially nice if you don't need something to be super constrained. The only thing that is constrained on this sketch is just that outside dimension overall. Surprise, surprise, that's parametrically constrained to our inside diameter. So if we want the ID of our inner cylinder to change, this paddle is going to change along with it. I did again. Man, controls. Okay. So we're going to extrude that. This is just an offset extrude because I wanted this top flat surface to work with. And the next thing we're going to do is a little bit tricky. So in most CAD environments, Fusion included, you typically can't create sketches or use the hole tool or anything like that on a curved surface. And unfortunately, the paddle is a curved surface. So what I'm doing is I'm creating yet another plane on that curved surface. And then I'm also just going to create a sketch and extrude it for one hole and then do a rectangular pattern for the rest of the holes. It's a pretty clean solution to something that can become really tricky if you really, really want to get holes into a curved surface. The next thing I'm going to do is actually just a circular pattern to pattern this, because although I could mirror it, I really want this U shape to be flipped on the other side so that it makes this S shape, which is why I'm doing that circular pattern. It's going to do what I want it to do with the paddle. So the next thing, I'm just going to start sort of putting things together and constraining them. But before I constrain everything, I'm going to make my handle next. So you can see I'm making my crank component. This is a really fun, very freeform shape. Essentially, all I'm doing is I'm going to create man. All right, I'm gonna create this extruded little notch, and that's just what's attaching the handle to the paddle itself. You could do this as a hex as well, but obviously this is just a little bit less complicated. The other thing is, if you're 3D printing it, there's always kind of an issue with tolerancing. There's at least 2 thou tolerance between all of the parts here that need to fit together. But even that can be iffy with 3D printers, and you might end up sanding things down for hours, which is certainly something I've had to do in the past. So just keeping it simple with a rectangle just to get that location, I think, is more than sufficient. The next thing we're going to do is create a mirrored plane, and we're going to use that mirrored plane to create our path. This is just another spline. There's no rhyme or reason to this whatsoever. If you really cared, you could make it sort of fit to your hand. This is just something that I thought would look cool, frankly. 3D printers, don't we love them? Anyway, I'm gonna follow that spline, and that gives me this kind of weird, wacky, fun little handle shape. And then I'm just gonna clean it up and make it look a little bit nicer by just adding a little end cap onto it. And then just gonna start jointing things together, and then I'll add some fillets all around here just to make it look nice, and also because sharp edges aren't super comfortable to use for a hand crank. So you can see I've jointed the paddle in to the actual lid component, and then I'm gonna start just assembling everything, putting things inside of things. And we have our finalized part. This last part is just me grounding it, which is something I should have done at the beginning. People are being loud. Okay, anyway, and then just jointing it to the end. So I talked a lot about parametric modeling, and now I will show you all of the magic that is secretly behind this whole thing. If I go to modify, change parameters, which is right here, it's kind of a hidden menu, but it's one of my favorite menus. You can see that I have quite a few favorited parameters. Almost all of them are based off of this, the barrel outer diameter. I've named these all in my convention, which is exactly this, underscores and capital letters, basically. And if you're a CS person or a computer kind of person, you can kind of think of these as the macros of CAD. These are things that are really easy to find that can affect everything really quickly. And what you'll see is these are all of my main ones, and these, so they have actual numbers attached to them. But if you start digging into my actual model parameters, you'll see that a lot of those model parameters are relational sizes that relate to other things. That way, for example, if I decide that I want my outer barrel to be 8 inches instead, I have a really big 3D printer and I want more ice cream, I can change that expression, hit OK, and suddenly everything is larger. Because this is maintaining that gap will still be maintained, and so I'll have a bigger barrel. But maybe I have a different sized ice cube and I want more of a gap. I can go to modify, change parameters. This guy right here is our inner barrel OD. It's our barrel OD minus 1.5. That's accounting for our gap. If I wanted to change this to, let's say 2.5, I can do that, hit OK. And suddenly everything will be updated. And you'll notice not only did it update this guy, but it also updated the lid and everything that comes with the lid, because these are all relational to each other. And that's the real power of parameters in general, is they really allow you to modify things without worrying about how everything is going to fit together. You can see it just popped up an error because of the width there. It couldn't calculate it because essentially I was asking this diameter to be larger than it should have been because I hadn't changed those in order. So that's generally parametric modeling. If anybody has something specific, we have a few minutes that we can dive into questions. Otherwise, Renee can tell you a little bit more about history and what we have coming for the rest of the month.
Yeah. Hello. If no one has any questions, I think Adriani did a very nice job explaining everything. And just unmute yourself or submit in the chat. I'll shut up for a couple minutes if anyone has any questions or thoughts on So
Yeah,
on
and
parametric
we'll sit
modeling.
in silence.
No, that was how long would that normally take you to actually work all that out about?
So it depends on how much of a plan you have. I had a sort of plan. So I think actually we can go in and we can look at my version history. Isn't that crazy? This is another cool thing about Fusion that I haven't seen in a lot of other CAD software is versioning, which is really nice. If I was cool, I would name my versions. But you can see I started this on the 26th at 10:08.55 a.m. and I pretty much finished, let's see, 2 hours later, approximately. And then I played around with it later. So this took me about 2 hours. It's not hard to do parameters. If like that's not the main time sink, a lot of it is just like coming up with how everything is going to go together. Because all you have to do for parameters, you see I have this 6 inches. All you really have to do is barrel OD equals 6 inches. And then you can just name them as you're also defining that parameter. The real time sink, as always in CAD, is just figuring out how everything's fitting together and then just the actual work of putting things together. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. The other thing is I could bend rules for this. CAD is hard when you don't get to bend rules and just make things work. All right. Any other questions about stuff?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So whenever you're making something like this, where you have a lot of different pieces that are like working together, do you usually like to make them in like different tabs and then put them together? Or do you think it's best to like make them all in one place and fit them together?
Yeah. So kind of that's a really good question. Kind of like I was talking about before, if you are more comfortable, assuming if you've done CAD before, if you're more comfortable with other softwares, doing it all in like one thing probably seems really strange to you. And I'll admit, I came from Autodesk Inventor, where like the part file and the assembly file are two very different things, and they are not the same thing, and you should never make them the same thing. In Fusion, Fusion is really built so that you can make everything in one file like this. So I would say CAD as a whole, just accommodate whatever that software is designed to do for Fusion. It's really made to do this. And part of the reason is because it's cloud-based, it's meant to be shareable. So when we do things like this, you can see the whole story of this product. And so can Renee. Renee can come in here and make edits to it, and she doesn't have to get access to a bunch of files. She can just have this entire thing all in one go. And that's the appeal of having it all together. So that's my long drawn out way of saying for Fusion in particular, having everything in one file as just multiple components is ideal. And if for some reason I decided I really like this hand crank and I want it to be in another project, I can literally go into another project if it's saved. Sure. Don't ever do that. And then I can insert derive it from this part file. Save and continue. Okay. I can't see things because of Zoom. And then I can say crank. I can select that component. Oh, where'd my thing go? Hold on. Insert derive. This guy. Select. Save. Okay. Okay, yeah, I got my crank. And then I can hit, okay, if I wanted parameters, that's here buried down here, so I can include my parameters as well. Hit okay. And then now I have that part file somewhere there. Now I have that part file in my new file. And it's actually linked to the original file. So yeah, it's nice to have everything in one file, but you also don't lose the sort of part file component. You can still pull individual components into a new file if you want to reuse stuff, which we do a lot in different settings.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was super helpful.
Cool. Any other questions before we wrap this guy up?
At These are very good questions,
Yeah,
everyone.
these are awesome questions. I'm so happy. All right. If I don't hear any other questions, Renee, do you want to?
Samantha, I think, was gonna say something.
Oh, were you?
I
Okay.
just wanted to know where you were posting this video back to the Discord channel.
We're gonna, I can send a links to our YouTube channel. We plan on posting this video on our newly founded YouTube channel. And I plan on posting about that on our Instagram, on my LinkedIn, on all over the various Discords I'm a part of, like the
We'll throw it
Bechtel
up in
Center
the
one,
Discord too.
student ambassador Discords. It basically will go anywhere that it has a social media platform that at least I am part of.
Yeah.
So, but if you would like it, can we email this to them if they like want to send it to others that don't have it? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's up to you, Adriana.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.